and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about 5 mistakes that piano students make. These are mistakes I used to make as a student, and they're mistakes that I often see piano students making, so I thought this would be a really good topic for a video. The first one is practicing at the wrong speed. A lot of times when we talk about practicing at the wrong tempo, people immediately assume that we're talking about practicing too fast. But actually, it's possible to practice either too fast or too slowly. You can tell if you're practicing too fast because it leads to what I call a stammering type of practice, where you play lots of wrong notes and then quickly correct them as you go. And that sounds kind of like this. How I was playing really fast, but then like grouping notes together and having to repeat notes over and over. That's the result of practicing it too quickly. When you do this, you're playing faster than your brain and your muscles will allow you to actually process and learn. And so what happens is you practice in all kinds of wrong mistakes, and then you later on can get very frustrated because you're not able to play the right notes consistently. Now, the flip side of this is that sometimes in an effort to be extremely conscientious and avoid any possibility of a mistake, pianists practice too slowly. We don't want to practice too slowly because practice time is precious, and we don't want to spend time in a practice room or practicing at the piano that isn't effective. Practicing too slowly can also lead to practicing unmusically, because if you practice at a tempo where the notes are just too far apart to have any musical meaning, then you can rob the piece of its expression because you're just playing notes. So here's how that sounds using the same piece. You can hear how I played every single note equally, and you can also hear how I played it too slowly for it to have any musical meaning. Psychologists have found that we learn the most effectively when something is at just the right level of challenge for us. When you practice too quickly, the level of challenge is too high, and you can't take in everything that's happening. And when you're practicing too slowly, the level of challenge is too low, and what happens is it's hard to concentrate. The solution to this is to monitor the level of effort you're experiencing when you practice. Try to stay at the level where you're feeling challenged and you're feeling engaged, but where it's not so hard that it feels frustrating. You can do this by monitoring your emotions as you practice. Frustration is often a symptom of practicing too fast. If you're practicing too fast, you need to find a way to simplify what you're playing, either by slowing everything down or by working on it hands separately until it's secure and then putting the hands back together. A symptom of practicing too slowly is detachment or boredom. You should feel mentally engaged and challenged when you practice. If something's easy and you can already play it, then don't waste your time practicing it super duper slowly, and instead work only on the part that's actually challenging. That'll be much more effective and efficient, and then you'll be practicing at the right tempo for whatever it is that you're working on. Mistake number 2 that piano students make is not listening to themselves while they practice. As a pianist, you need to focus on the sound you're making at the instrument. Some people also call this tone. You need to actually listen to the quality of the sound or tone that's coming out of the piano. Too often, I see piano students focusing on the mechanics of what they're doing instead of actually listening to the sound they're producing. Not listening to your sound can result in pushing too hard into each key and putting too much pressure into the keyboard, and that creates a somewhat harsh and ugly sound. It results in playing too loud and can also lead to physical injury because you're not releasing at the bottom of the key. This is what it sounds like when you're playing that way. Do you hear how harsh that sound was? And did you notice that I was really pushing down and I wasn't releasing at the bottom of the key? The flip side of that is playing with a weak or anemic sound. I hear this kind of sound a lot when students play scales or repertoire, and it's a very wispy or wimpy sound. It kind of sounds like this, just on the surface of the key. The way to fix this is to learn to listen to your actual sound as you play. In order to improve your ability to do that, you need to cultivate the habit of being present when you practice and engaging with the sound you produce. I have a colleague at another university who meditates for 1 minute at the keyboard every time she sits down and practices. Now that allows her to be present to what she's doing and to center on being intentional at the piano. When you practice, don't allow yourself to play with an overly harsh or an overly weak sound. Listen to every sound that you produce at the instrument. Get in the habit of asking yourself, what is the quality of my sound? Does it match the sound I imagine in my head? Is it even from one note to the next? What do I need to change in order to produce a better sound? This habit will lead to more attentive practicing and an improvement in the quality of your sound over time. The third mistake that piano students make is adding expression later. This is a classic piano student problem, which is that people focus on playing the correct notes and the correct rhythms, but then they ignore everything else written in the score with the plan to go back and add expression after they already know the piece. The reason it's not a good idea to wait to add expression is because if you learn the piece one way and then later on decide you're going to change a bunch of things by adding in articulation and dynamics, you're going to have to retrain your hands and fingers to do things differently. That means you have to, in essence, learn it twice, which is totally inefficient, and it can feel very frustrating. One way to incorporate expression into your practice is to intentionally, in a practice session, work on one parameter of the music at a time. So go through your score and look at all of the articulation markings. Look at the places where there are slurs and staccato markings, and look at them and decide, where are you going to separate? Ask yourself if you're actually connecting the notes where it says to connect, and ask yourself if you're detaching the notes where you need to detach them, and then practice that articulation. Really observe the slurs and staccatos and all of the markings in the score. Then repeat that over several practice sessions until the articulation is very clean and clear. Now you can do the same thing with shaping and dynamics. Make sure you notice all the dynamics in the score, but go beyond that. If a composer doesn't have dynamics written in the score, that doesn't mean not to do dynamics. It means that the composer is expecting you to do natural shaping and phrasing based on your experience of the style and your experience as a musician. And so every time you practice, play with shaping, play with expression. Observe the markings in the score. Listen to yourself, compare what you're doing to what's written in the music, and make sure you're shaping everything so that notes are going to a note in a phrase or coming away from a note. Mistake number 4 is waiting for inspiration to strike. If you want to progress at your instrument, it's important to show up every single day regardless of how you feel. Don't wait until you're in the mood to practice, but instead just have it become an automatic part of your life. Otherwise, there's a tendency to procrastinate on it because there are always so many other demands on our time. This is difficult advice to follow, and we all struggle with it from time to time. For example, I'm taking time away from practicing right now in order to make this video. There are a couple different strategies you can do to make sure that you show up at the piano every day. The first thing you can do is make sure that you practice at a consistent time every day. Reserve that time just for practicing. Now, most often I see people practicing either early in the morning, like me, or late at night. It's harder to have the bulk of your practice be in the middle of the day unless you have no other distractions or responsibilities, just because there tends to be a lot of things that start to crowd out your practice time. Another thing you can do is learn how long it takes you to do things and accomplish things when you practice. Get out your practice journal and write down the time you start, the time you stop, and then write down what you did during that time, what you got done, and what you want to do in the next session. And the reason that that's helpful in terms of showing up every day is because then when you have a plan and you know exactly what's going to happen when you sit down at the instrument, you can't wait to get to the piano to continue your work. The thing you want to avoid when you practice is the feeling that you get when you sit down at the instrument and you don't know what you're going to do. And you say, well, this is my practice time, but I'm not sure what to do, so I guess I'll just play this piece all the way through. You really want to have a better sense of what you're going to do in each practice session so that you can be very efficient and notice concrete gains as you play, because that's what's going to keep you motivated and consistent. Mistake number 5 that piano students commonly make is not using music theory to help them learn their music. The language of music has its own syntax, which we call music theory. Music is basically all about patterns, and music theory helps you understand and recognize those patterns, which then helps immensely both in terms of learning and also in terms of your own interpretation. I was giving a lesson not too long ago where a student was playing a Haydn sonata from memory. She was really struggling to play it accurately and to remember the notes. At the end of it, I said to her, you know, it seems to me like you're playing this whole piece from memory, but you don't really know what key you're playing in or what any of the chords are. You're just trying to remember literally what each next note is. And she said, yes, actually, you're right. I'm really not thinking at all about music theory. I don't even know what chord I'm playing in any given moment. I'm just trying to remember what note comes next. And I told her, you know, it is so much harder to do what you're trying to do than it is to actually apply music theory to the piece when you're trying to memorize it. And she already knows a lot of music theory. She had actually already done a harmonic analysis of the piece and written chord symbols below the chords throughout the piece and also written in the key areas. But she wasn't using that analysis to help remember or interpret any part of the piece. So it was like there were two separate things in her mind. And so in that lesson, we took time to go through and we looked at all the key areas she was playing in. We looked at the chord progressions, especially familiar chord progressions like 4-5-1. We identified the cadences. We tied all of that to her performance and interpretation. Then she went away and practiced it that week and spent time tying the harmonic analysis to her memory of the piece and understanding where she was in the piece and also the patterns that were coming forth as a result of understanding music theory. Then the next lesson she came back and she played it much more securely from memory. And she told me she felt so relieved to know there was another way to remember and memorize the piece besides just using brute force and rote memorization note by note. If you understand the piece, if you know music theory and you apply it to a piece you're playing, then you're going to have a much better sense of where you are in the piece, what key area you're in, and the significant moments. That helps create a roadmap of the piece so that at any given moment you know where you are and where you're going. Understanding and applying music theory helps piano playing in so many ways, including in sight reading. If you can scan and see patterns as you sight read, you're going to experience enormous improvement at it. If you want to learn more about sight reading, I've got this whole video over here where I go over the step-by-step sight reading checklist that I use with my students. So click right there to check it out. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and happy practicing.